Welcome students. In today's lecture, we will be covering the designing principles. I will be covering the main important 6 basic principles of design, which are unity and variety, scale and proportion, emphasis, contrast, balance, and rhythm. So we will be discussing them one by one. Before moving ahead to each one of them, it's important for us to understand that designing principles are very important. We can refer to them as a set of rules which help us, which guide us in our project that is related to any visual content creation or any graphic design that we want to work upon. These help us in as a guideline for creating the entire designing in our composition. So we will be starting with the very first principle of design, which is unity and variety. So as on the screen, you all can see these images that are shown. The one says unity, that is through same color and different size. And if we talk about another image, it talks about unity, same size, and variety, different colors, right? So this is a basic thing that we are noticing in both of these columns. In the very first one, we are having all the circles that are in yellow, right? So it is having the same color. The similarity among all these elements is the same color. While if we see the variation, that is about the different sizes. If we see the other side of the column or the second column, here we notice that each of the color of each of the circle is different. So we are using different colors as a principle of variety. If we see the variation among them is the use of different color. But if we see the similarity, that is the same size of these circles, right? So this is the principle of unity and variety. We can simply understand that the principle of unity and variety tells us about the degree of agreement or variation. If we talk about the degree of agreement among the elements of a designing, that is related to principle of unity. While if we talk about the principle related to principle of variety, then we are noticing variation in the visual theme, or we can see in the design, right? The variation among the different elements that we have used in our designing. And unity is helping us to arrange all the similar elements together, and it is giving an appearance of harmony that exists among all the elements of the composition. So this is very important principle of our designing, and we have to give it consideration when we are working with any of the content creation. The very second principle that we have is the principle of scale and proportion. You all can notice in this image, we are having the main subject, right? The one that is the balloon, the air balloon that we see. While if we see the second element, that is the hand, which is having a bokeh effect, or it is blur, right? So when we notice this particular image, we can see the subject, there is a difference among them, or we can see there is a relative size difference that we notice in the entire image. So the principle of scale and proportion talks about the relative size measured against all the other elements that are present in your entire composition. So this is also very significant and important principle of designing, which is associated with size and proportion, the relative proportion with respect to the size of various elements that we are using. Another important principle that we have of designing is emphasis. We can notice in this picture, we can clearly see the main subject. Here on the one side, we are having a flower. On the other side, we are having a fish. We can clearly notice, we can see how it is differentiated from the background. We can clearly lay emphasis on the main subject. So when we want to draw attention to a particular piece, or we want to encourage closer scrutiny to a particular work, then we use the principle of emphasis, right? We are focusing on a particular element in the entire design, as you can see the example on the screen. The very next principle that we have of designing is the principle of contrast. Contrast in design is an accentuation of differences between the elements. So if we see this particular image that I have shared on the screen, we are having color, shape, size, line, typeface, and orientation. So these are the different elements, or we can see these are the different ways in which we can set contrast among the elements in our composition. So it depends on us what difference we want to show in our entire designing, whether we want to use a particular color. As you can see in this image, we are having different color or the opposite color, which is helping us to highlight a particular square in comparison to all other three. Right. So when we are trying to set a contrast or set a difference with respect to color, shape, size, or a typeface or a font, or with respect to width of a line, as we can see in the image, or with respect to orientation, that means we are setting the difference and we are applying the principle of contrast in our designing. Then moving ahead to the very next principle of design, which is principle of balance. So as the name suggests, balancing plays very significant role in our designing. How we are distributing the visual weight of the design elements within a composition tells you about the principle of balance. Further, we can have two broad categories of balancing. We can have symmetrical balance, we can have asymmetrical balance. In the images here on the screen, we can see in the very first image, if we divide it into two halves, we are having equal number of circles on both the sides. While if we see the image where it's written balance asymmetrical, here if we divide it into two, then we can notice the asymmetry among the elements of designing. So balancing talks about the visual weight, and it is very important for us to balance our entire image or the elements that we are using in our entire composition. Moving ahead to the last principle of designing for today, which is the principle of rhythm. We all can notice this beautiful image which shows a flow or beat in the entire design. So whenever we talk about repetition of recurrent motifs, or we can say a particular pattern or a particular design or an element which is repetitively used, and it also shows a flowy effect or a beat in the design or through the design, then we can say that refers to the principle of rhythm. We all can use this principle of rhythm very creatively in any of the designing that we are working upon, whether you want to create posters, whether you want to create pamphlets, brochure, magazine covers, anything, you can apply all these principles of design, which are very significant in our designing, and these are the guidelines to move ahead with our design. So that's all for today's class. I hope you have understood the various design elements. Stay tuned to our channel, like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you all.